So last week, I was a little bit stressed because I had so much unexpected work to do with the phone call on Wednesday about doing a funeral on Saturday. And then this week, my computer started smelling like burning electronics. So therefore, I had to shut that down. And one of the things that I've learned is how much stuff I have stored in that computer that I thought had been stored on the cloud, and it actually wasn't. So therefore, I've got a little bit of stress going on this week. And of course, next weekend we're doing the big wedding, so I don't expect any stress between now and next week. It's going to be piece of cake, easy. I've already had 2 weeks of stress. What could possibly go wrong? I don't even want to know. I think it's best if we never know what's going to go wrong until it goes wrong. That's my opinion about things. So the title of today's message is How God Makes the Weak Strong. And I picked this picture of this chick, being hatched from an egg because, it looked all soggy and bedraggled and had no strength whatsoever. And that seemed to be, I thought, the best representation of where we sometimes find ourselves with the sort of things that we go through in life. We're just looking around and we feel about as strong as that newborn chick looks in the picture. So that was the reason why I picked that as my opening graphic today. Oh no. And I lost. Oh, don't do that to me. I don't need more things going wrong. So our key question is, do Christians experience spiritual danger? Okay, so that's where we're starting out. And sometimes when people are going through difficulty and it seems like everything in their world is falling apart, that's one of the fears that people have. Because sometimes when everything is falling apart, our response is not all controlled and spiritual and marvelous and wonderful. Sometimes we have really bad reactions to things as they go on. So I want to start with this verse I just wanted to share with you because this is God talking about our spiritual safety. From Romans 8:38, it says, "Nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither angels or demons, our fears for today or our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love." So the answer to the question is, can Christians experience spiritual danger, is technically no. That's one of the things that we rely on God for. So if we don't have to worry about that, then how do we then make it through each day of life when you never know what sort of stuff is going to be thrown your way? So you got to give me my thing back. Our key idea is faith is not a spectator sport. God wants you involved, active, and seeking his help. In other words, he promises to protect you. That was what Jesus had asked him to do, and that's a promise that he has made. But I think we have to recognize the idea that that promise, which is ironclad, also comes with some instructions. Not because if we don't follow the instructions we won't have protection. It's that the instructions help us to be able to live a better life as we're going through the stress and the turmoil that life can throw our way. So it comes with the instructions. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at some of the instructions of how we can enjoy life even when it isn't always easy to live. So we're in 1 Peter chapter 5. This is the very tail end of the entire book of 1 Peter. We're in verses 6 through 11, page 859 of the Pew Bible. So that's where we're going to be today. So we start off in verse 6, and it says, "So humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honor." So we've got two kind of things that are going on here. We have the idea of the humbling, and we have the idea of the honor. And so, you're being told to do something, and when you do that, then you enjoy the benefits of the other. So those are the two things that are going on. But we want to look at the idea of humility here and take a look at that. So humility, and we were just looking at this in the remnant this morning, it's about having yourself recognizing that within the hierarchy of God's kingdom, you are low in that hierarchy and you are dependent, okay? So part of being humble means that you are actually going to depress your pride. You're going to hold your pride down. And that's a problem for us because by nature and by the fact that we are sinners, we are given to being very prideful, of being very puffed up and thinking that we're somehow better and more important than we really are. So humility is where you do this, check on yourself and you go, yep, I'm not as great as I thought I was. And these circumstances that I don't know how to deal with are reminding me that I'm not everything that I thought I was, and I can't do everything that I thought I could do. And sometimes, that humility comes from life. There were things that I did when I was in my 20s that I did pretty well. And I found out when I was in my 50s, I couldn't do those things very well. I didn't know I couldn't do them very well until I tried to do them and found out, oh, what I used to think was easy is now hard. And that's part of the process of aging, is you keep finding that you age out of your ability to do things that you thought you could do. It was wonderful when I was a little kid and I was striving so hard to be able to do things and to be able to do things well, to remember stuff and to be right on top of things and to get it done. And finally there was a certain point, when I got into adulthood and I was doing the things that I was supposed to do and I was remembering what I was supposed to remember and I was where I was supposed to be and things didn't slip through the cracks with me. Now I'm getting into my late 60s and almost everything slips through the cracks. It's amazing what I can't remember. It's like I am actually in some respects worse now than I was when I was a kid and I was being told by my parents, what's with you? You don't remember anything. You can't do it. It's like, you know what? I'm the same way now, just for different reasons, Then I couldn't do it because I was immature and I didn't know any better and I didn't care. But I didn't like being told that I was childish and immature, so I really worked at overcoming that. And then when I got to the point of having overcome it, I thought, okay, there you go. Now I've got my act together. And then I found out that is just a window in your life. It's like, the flowers in the garden that, they come out and they look beautiful and gorgeous. And then you get to the end of the season and they're all, and they fall down and they go back into the earth again. So whatever you thought you were or whatever you were hoping you were going to become or whatever you think that you achieved, guess what? You're going to find out that you are going to be humbled by this body that you live in for now. So your hierarchy is low spiritually, your hierarchy is low, in the world that we're in, and we are always dependent on others to help us, and we're definitely dependent upon God. So this idea of humility is a really important idea. This next idea, and I had thought afterwards that I should put numbers on the slides to the things that we need to remember to do. Okay, so it says, give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. So this idea of giving. That's one of these things, and I've talked to people and they say that they do this, and I know what it's like because I've done it too. You give something to God, and then you take it back. And you go, what am I doing? You give it to God. And then you end up taking it back. And this can go on again and again until you're finally like, Lord, what is with me? I thought when I gave it to you that I was done with it, and yet I keep taking it back. Why do I keep doing that? So this idea of giving is a very important idea because I told you that the promise of protection is going to come with some instructions. And this is one of the instructions. If you really want to depend upon God and to feel secure in him and to enjoy, his protection, then you're going to have to engage with him. And one of the ways is that you're going to give all of your worries. Now, worries, or the giving here, is the letting go. It's the shift of responsibility. In other words, you're looking at your thing and you're saying, God, you know what? I think I want you to have this responsibility. Have you ever done that, like being in charge of an organization and you got different people in the organization and you say, you know what? Here, why don't you do this? It's the shifting of responsibility. It's very freeing, isn't it? You know, when you've got a lot on your plate and a lot of things to do, and you can just hand some of it off to somebody else and go, there, I got that under control. Management's great, isn't it? So in your life and in your relationship with God, God's actually inviting you. He's like, come on, shift the responsibility. That's one of the things that I'm here for. What are you waiting on? So you want to be able to let go and shift the responsibility. Then you want to shift the things that cause you to have anxiety. I'm not exactly sure why, because I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or anything like that. But for some reason, people in our culture are just overrun with anxiety. Anxiety, which you never heard about before, is just like so many people have it. And they're to the point where they're so debilitated by it that they can't do very basic, simple things. They just want to avoid all contact with other human beings, and they just want to get as far away from stuff. And so what I would say to anybody who feels that way on any level is that God has already said, give it to me. Shift the responsibility. So what's causing you to be anxious? What's causing you to be all wrought up? Just come on, hand it over. That's what God is saying to you. You're facing a source of distress. You're facing things that are causing great concern. God gets it. He knows that there are all sorts of things that we can be concerned about in the life that we live. And he's saying, come on, give that stuff to me. So you need to look at what's going on in your life. You need to look at the things that you're worried about. Are you just worried about being in public? Are you worried about your finances? Are you worried about your health? Are you worried about other family members? What is it that you're worried about? Are you worried about passing the next test you have to take in school? I mean, what is your worry? And God says, come on, give that to me. Let me help you with that. So God wants you to give your worry. So giving these sorts of things to God is part of his instructions so that you can live a life and rely on his protection and be at peace as you do it. In verse 8, he says, stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Well, I had to really stress the stay alert and watch, this sort of an idea. Now, in this New Living Translation, there is no Greek word for alert. The word really is stay. And that word stay in Greek kind of encompasses the rest of what's in those three words. And so that's why I did that way in the notes, because I wanted you to realize that sometimes the words in the translation are trying to give you a sense of what the original language meant, even though if they did a truly strict word-for-word translation, you wouldn't get that sense. You would lose it. So that's what they've done. So let's just take a look at the word study here for stay alert and watch. It's telling you, now you've given everything to God. Remember, you said, okay, you can have my worries, you have my concerns, but just because I've given you my concerns and I've asked you to take that responsibility on, I am still going to remain, as it says here, sober, calm, and vigilant. Okay? I am still going to have a clear head about what's going on around me. Rather than allowing myself to be caught up in all kinds of emotional anguish to the point where I can't even see straight, I am going to remain sober. I'm going to remain clear-headed about things. And because I'm clear-headed, I'm going to remain calm. Why? Because you've taken over the responsibility, and you're in charge, and you're going to protect me, and I'm going to remain calm, and I'm going to remain vigilant. Why? Because just because you've made a promise doesn't mean that I can shut my eyes. It doesn't mean that I can just relax and not think about anything. You know, these are part of the instructions. Yes, he's promised he's going to protect you, but at the same time, he wants you to know what's coming up. And that's really important. So we get on to the next word, which is devour, okay? And it's about being overwhelmed, and it's about being destroyed. So destruction is not what's going to happen to your soul. There are other kinds of destruction that can happen in your life. For example, your family relationships could be destroyed. You could destroy that kind of stuff. Your reputation could be destroyed. You know, your career, all kinds of stuff in your life can be destroyed. You can be overwhelmed by all kinds of stuff. The idea here is that the devil wants to take you off the path that you're supposed to be on. He wants to get you to the place where you are ineffective. One of the things that he likes most is when people say about us and about the church is how much they hate Christians and how much they hate the church, and they have no use for it, and they'd never darken the door of a church ever in their life because they know how those people are. He loves it when people say that. Why? So the point here is, are you going to allow yourself to get into situations where you are going to look bad? Are you going to see that your reputation has been tarnished, where people are going to look at you and say, I'd never have anything to do with that person. That person is so, superior acting and so judgmental and obnoxious. I can't stand them. You need to look at what's going on around you, and you need to be paying attention so that you don't get taken off the path that God has for you. So I put this note on here that believers can be used but not lose salvation. In other words, you can be in a place where the devil is actually using you for his purposes, and you're allowing yourself to be used. And the reason why you're allowing yourself to be used is because you haven't stayed alert. You're not paying attention to what's going on around you. And people will always come along, who are, being used by Satan. And they'll come along and they'll put things in front of you, and they'll make it sound spiritual, and they'll make it sound Christian, and it has the patina of those kinds of things. And yet it's missing the stuff which defines the love of God. It gets you to the place where you're judging something, where you're impatient with something, where you're not being kind to somebody. You're not actually showing the love of God to somebody. You're showing all kinds of other things. And the whole time you're doing that, you think you're doing something for God. We need to remember that we do things to serve God. There's a line that used to be used all the time years ago in my life when I was part of another denomination. And people would always say, we are doing a mighty work for the Lord, they would say. They were always declaring the mighty work that they were doing. And I looked at that and it's like, in all humility, are you and I actually capable of doing a mighty work? God's capable of doing a mighty work through us, but we ourselves are not really capable of doing a mighty work. When we start taking the credit for doing a mighty work, we're putting ourselves ahead of God instead of saying, I'm making myself available. I won't even know whether it's a mighty work until after the fact. While I'm in the middle of doing it, I'm not going to know what's mighty. I'm going to think that some things look mighty, and those things will end up being unimportant. And then there will be the little quiet thing that I never even noticed that I was a part of, and I'll find out later when I'm in the presence of God that that was the mighty thing that was done, and he really used that in an incredible way. So my point here is that you want to be staying aware of what's going on around you so that Satan doesn't use you. The devouring that he does is not a matter of devouring your soul and taking you away from God. It's about making you ineffective for how God can work in your life. And you don't want to make God ineffective because you're doing all of the wrong things and you're not paying attention to what's going on. So this is a very important idea. So we've already had a couple of different ideas. We talk about giving things to God. Now it's about staying alert, staying awake, and watching for what's going on around you. And then it's got several things in verse 9. It says, stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering that you are. So we've got standing firm, being strong, and the remembering. In each one of those things, when we look at the definitions, we get more of a sense of what Peter is saying with this. So on stand, he's talking about opposing and resisting. So when you're being alert and you're aware of what's going on, and now you're going to oppose it. You're going to stand firm in what you know to be true. And you're not going to allow yourself to be swept away into something that you know is false and that God doesn't want for you. So you're going to oppose and be resistant. This is one of those things that you have to be active and intentional about. This is really important, that once you've stayed alert. And once you've seen what's really going on around you, and you've sorted through the stuff that appears Christian and spiritual, but is really from the devil himself, once you have seen this and you know what's going on, now you've discerned what's really happening, and now you're not going to go along with it. You're going to stand firm. You're going to oppose this. No, I'm not going to be a part of this. I don't care what a whole bunch of other Christians say. It's wrong, and I'm not going to be a part of something that I know is wrong. It's hard to do this, you know. It's really hard to be around other Christians who are all jumping on a bandwagon, and the bandwagon is an unkind bandwagon. It's a judgmental bandwagon. It's a bandwagon that is not of God. And to be able to say to people and say, no, that's not right. I am not going to be a part of that. It's hard because emotionally, we like to be on board with everyone around us. We want to agree to everything. I can remember at one point when I was serving as an elder in a church and they wanted to do something, and I thought, well, I don't think it's a very good idea. And I was silent, and I just stayed silent, and they all talked about it, and they all, you know, were saying, yeah, this is great, and they were confirming with each other how much on board they were with the idea. And then finally somebody looked at me and they go, Brad, you haven't said anything. What do you think? Well, first off, the reason why I wasn't saying anything is because I was listening. And I was listening, and I was trying to understand what the real issue was and whether what they were discussing would be pleasing to God or not. I was wanting to get a handle on it, so I was keeping quiet and not having an opinion. Then, once I had an opinion which was not going to go along with their opinion, I was keeping my mouth shut because, let's face it, do any of us really want to find ourselves to be the one person who doesn't agree with the group and having everybody stare at you? It's like, well, why don't you agree? What's wrong with you? We're all on board. We all think it's a great idea. And so I finally had to say, no, I don't think it's a good idea. Well, why? So then I had to give my reasons why. And finally I just said, listen, guys, this is not a hill I choose to die on. I don't think it's a wise idea. I don't think you should do it. But if you want to go ahead and do it, go ahead and do it. It's not an important enough idea for me to be in a battle over it. And they decided, well, if they couldn't be unanimous and everybody couldn't agree, they weren't going to do it. And in the end, they came to realize that they shouldn't do it. That actually the opposition that I put up was actually a message from God. I didn't even know it was a message from God at the time. I just didn't feel comfortable about it. In hindsight, I can look back on it. Nobody likes to be in opposition and to be the one person who says, no, I'm not on board with this. I don't favor it. Nobody wants to be in that position. So when it says that we're supposed to stand firm, in other words, sometimes you have to be willing to not agree with what everybody else says, and to be able to say, no, I've thought about this, I've prayed about this, I've considered it, and I just can't bring myself to agree on this. And that's all there is to it. It's just, I'm not trying to stand in your way, I'm not trying to stop you from doing anything, but I just can't agree with it. I can't go along and say, yeah, I think it's a great idea, because I don't. This is a hard place for us to be in emotionally. And Satan uses this against us. He knows that if we're going to cave at any particular point, we're going to cave when we end up feeling like we are the only one who thinks the way we do, and that nobody else is going to agree with us. And there are so many ways in which Christians try to put weight in what they say. You know, there are these points of theology, and theologians will argue a certain type of theology, and they'll say, well, that can't be any good because that's too new. This, you know, we've been thinking this way and we've been teaching this for hundreds of years, and now this new thing comes along and it has to be wrong because it's new. Sometimes what was being taught for hundreds of years was wrong because it was misinterpreted. Because if you go back into the history of something, you find out that there was an agenda that people had, and they were pursuing a particular line of reasoning because that line of reasoning was consistent with the agenda, the outcome that they wanted. And when you come and you look at it, after all of that context is lost and you don't know what any of that history is, and you just look at it and you see what it's saying, you go, no, it's not saying that, it's saying this. And then you have to contend with all these people who will argue against it because they have history on their side. And sometimes they may have history on their side, but that doesn't mean that they have God on their side. So standing in opposition is one of those things that we have to do. We have to always look at the things that have been created by man, and we have to be willing to question it. And that means we have to also be willing to question ourselves. We need to be willing to let somebody else question us and to see whether an idea will stand up through all of this withering criticism and examination. And if it does, then it's from God, and if it doesn't, then it wasn't from God. This is a hard place to be in. It's a place that most of us don't want to do, and if we're ever going to cave on anything, it's going to be when we are the only one who thinks a certain way about something. But if you know that you are right, then you are right. It says to remain strong. Now, we're talking about strong in your faith. So to be strong in your faith means that you are always loyal to God. You always have loyalty. It means that you might be feeling weak, and you might be having questions, and you might be having doubts, but having doubts is not necessarily the issue at hand. Because if you're having doubts, you can go before God and you can say, God, help me with this. I need to be strengthened in my faith. This is one of those things where God says, well, if you don't have enough faith, ask. I mean, God can give you more faith. That's not really a problem. You just need to be able to identify when your faith is starting to become weak and wobbly, and you're getting to the place where you're just not really sure about things, and that's when you need to go, God, I'm really getting wobbly here. I need your strength to help me remain strong in my faith. I need more faith to be able to believe you at this particular time. And so you're talking about a faith which is immovable, a faith which won't give up. That doesn't mean you never have doubts. That doesn't mean you don't have questions. That doesn't mean that you don't go before God and you say, God, what is going on? I don't understand it. You can still do all of those things. But when it's over and done with, you know in your heart of hearts that you're going to come to the place where you trust in God and in Christ alone, and that part never changes ever. Even when you don't understand things, you know that it's only Christ, it's always Christ, and it's never anything else but Christ. It talked about remembering. And remembering is about paying attention. And I've got these two, paying attention, observing, and understanding. This idea of remembering is that you're getting to that place where you know what's going on with the history of things around you. You know what God has done. You know what you have seen God do. You've been observing God in action, and you understand that what you're going through is a snapshot in time. It's not eternity. It's really important to know that. You have to see the difference between I'm going through this, and this is just a moment. This is not eternity. What I'm living right now is not eternity. It's a moment. And so if you can remember these sorts of truths and pay attention to what God has already done and what God has promised to do, and that God's promises don't change, and you're observing God in action, doing things in your life and in the lives of others, if you are remembering, this is a key thing, because when you can remember all of this stuff about God and how he has been, it's a whole lot easier to deal with the turmoil and the things that make you feel weak. So these are all things that you do. These are the things that God asks of you. So he is asking you to be able to stand firm and to remember. Those are what he asks of you. In the beginning of verse 10, it says, in his kindness, God called you to share in his glory by means of Christ. Not his glory, eternal glory is what I should have said. He wants you to share in his eternal glory by means of Christ Jesus. So this is God doing the call. So if God is doing the call, and if God is promising the eternal glory, this is not coming from a man. This is not coming from a sinner. This is not coming from somebody who has no way to make a promise to you. It's coming from God. So that changes the dynamic of the situation. So you're looking at what's going on around you, and you're remembering. This is one of the things that you would end up remembering. You would remember that God is the one who does the calling, and God is the one who does the promising, and God is the one who makes things happen. If you can remember that, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to be strong in your faith during some of the most difficult situations. The end of verse 10 and the beginning of 11. So after you have suffered a little while, he will restore, support, and strengthen you, and he will place you on a firm foundation. All power to him forever. Amen. So you had all of these things that you're told that you're supposed to do. You've got his promise that he's going to always protect you. And now, when you go through difficulty and you've been suffering and you've been giving things to him and you have been standing firm and you have been remembering, you've been doing all of the things that he asked you to do. Those are the things that you bring to this equation. You bring these things to him so that you know what's going on. But you bring it to him because he's got this particular promise that he makes. He says he will restore, support, and strengthen you. Okay? He is going to place you on a firm foundation. This is what he's going to do. So you remain firm and you keep a watch because you know that God has this promise of support and restoration and strength waiting for you. This is how God gives strength to the weak. This is how he does this. This isn't one of these things where God just waves a magic wand and poof, you're strong all of a sudden. God says, no, I want you to engage with me. I've made a promise. This is what I'm promising you. Now I want you to do something. There's some instructions. When you do these things, this is what's going to result. You're going to be involved with this. You're going to participate in this. You are not a spectator in your spiritual life. You are engaged in your spiritual life. You don't bring things about. You don't bring the strength about in yourself. It happens in you because you're staying focused on him and you're remembering what he's asking you to do. So our point here is that suffering is temporary and strength and security is eternal. That's the difference. So the suffering is temporary. Can you handle something that's temporary? Can you handle something that is going to end and isn't going to go on forever? If you thought it was going to go on for eternity, then suffering would be absolutely miserable. But if you know that suffering is only temporary, but God has promised good things that are going to be eternal, then that's one of the things that gives you strength in the middle of things. So usually when I do a takeaway, I'm done. I have one more slide after the takeaway slide. I'm giving you a fair warning that I'm changing everything up and doing it differently today. Suffering lets you know what to ask God for. That's really what suffering does for you. You never really know where you're weak. You never really know what you need until you begin to suffer. And you start finding out everything that you're not, everything that you can't do. Once you start finding those things out, what God is saying to you is now you're in a position to ask me for something. Now you know exactly what you need from me, and this is what I want you to do. So now I'm just going to do a quick review of what I've just been through. You know, you're weak? Okay, not a problem. God knows that by nature you're weak. So he says, ask him to take your worries. Give your worries to him. He asks you to stay calm and alert about what's going on. He asks you to stand firm and to resist. He asks you to look at how little faith you have and then to ask him for more faith. And then he asks you to remember and understand everything that he has done in the past, everything that others are going through, and everything that he has promised to give you in the middle of your weakness. He asks you to remember and understand. If you can do these things, then he will take the weakness that you're experiencing and you're going to come to realize, wow, God has given me strength that I did not know that I could have and that I did not know that I would have, and I didn't know how that strength would have shown itself in me. But because I have been faithful to God and I've done these things that he has asked me to do, now I can be able to give a testimony to how God has helped me and stood by me and given me strength when I didn't think that I would ever find strength. God gives it to you. So just remember to do these things.